Hey everyone, I'm Randall Garza alongside Bob Bettis and Joseph Jackson. Welcome to episode 3 of Formidable Opponents, a show that pits three people who have known each other virtually their entire lives in a series of conversations as we argue what is the best in a variety of fun and engaging topics we all like to argue about. So today's topic is best single game sports performance. Bob, Joseph, welcome. How are you guys doing?
Hey, we're doing great. How about yourself?
Doing good.
Excellent, guys. So we're talking about sports, talking about the best single game sports performance. Before we do that, when we say the phrase best single game sports performance, what are some of the things that come to your mind? What encompasses a best single game sports performance?
Well, to me, it's if it's any single game sport, it could be. It doesn't have to apply to a specific sport. We all know that. Whether it's scoring, certain amount of touchdowns in one game, scoring, certain amount of points in a basketball game, or simply just lifting your team to perform better. That to me is a great, that can apply to a single game, great performance.
Agreed. I would say, it's got to be something that's unforgettable, probably something that's unbelievable. It has to leave the audience in some kind of awe, right? The audience has got to be like, holy crap, this is amazing, right? This is an amazing performance. And I would even go so far to say it should be possibly career defining. It should be the career defining game or performance for that individual.
You wonder whether or not what you're watching is really happening. I guess that to me,
got you. That makes perfect sense.
I agree. All points taken well. I think best single game sports performance is something that when you think of the player, no matter how awesome they are or at what level, either they were a role player or they were one of the best at their sports, you think of that game immediately. And let's talk about some of the honorable mentions. Bob, Joseph, tell me some of the honorable mentions that didn't make the cut, but that you'd like to talk about a little bit. Joseph?
Well, one that, there's all the obvious ones. One that comes to mind, obviously, is Gretzky's 50 games in 50 goals in 50 games record that he broke. And actually, when he did this, the night that he did it, he scored 5 to do that. This was back when Gretzky was 21 years old in 81. It was just an unbelievable feat, especially for a young guy. Gail Sayers scoring 6 touchdowns in one game. These are incredible things. How about you, Bob?
Yeah, there's a few. Muhammad Ali's performance in the Rumble in the Jungle, against George Foreman was unbelievable. His rope-a-dope style. Reggie Jackson hitting 3 home runs in the World Series. Yep. The single game was amazing. One of the ones that really, really stood out to me that I almost picked, man, and it's one of the ones I kind of kicked myself that I didn't choose was Michael Phelps in the 2008 Olympics.
Yes.
I won 8 gold medals and broke 7 world records in one Olympics. That's something that's just amazing. It's unheard of. It was a great performance. And, I'm glad none of you all picked that one because that'd be hard to argue against.
That would be some of the ones I had. I had game 4 of the 87 playoffs. Eric Sleepy Floyd, a role player for the Houston Rockets, scored 51 points against the Showtime Lakers. And they won and I apologize. Sleepy Floyd was actually with the Golden State Warriors at the time. And Emmitt Smith, his separated shoulder game, 32 carries. Yes, for 229 yards in week 16 against the Giants in 1994, which had playoff implications. Had the Cowboys lost that game, they would have not received the bye. Who knows how that would have ended up? Of course, they ended up winning the title, and the man was in some serious pain. Game 5 of the NBA Finals, the Michael Jordan flu game that we all know about, or the pizza food poisoning game, however you want to put it. 38 points. 38 points, 7 rebounds, 5 assists, 3 steals, and a block. And the thing about that game is, you guys might remember in that finals game, the Bulls won it in game 6, where Scottie Pippen was injured and they barely, pulled it out. So had they gone to game 7, who knows what would have happened. And the last example I want to mention, and the only reason I didn't nominate this for my final best performance, I think it's bigger than sports. Terry Fox, who is a runner, he's a Canadian humanitarian. He ran across Canada, or he embarked to run across Canada to raise awareness for cancer research. He was an amputee, lost his leg due to cancer. Of course, it was just a tremendous, inspiring effort. I thought it was bigger than sports, so I didn't add it to my final list, but just some tremendous performances that we mentioned. But let's talk about our best pick. Bob, who did you go with and why?
Well, continuing with that inspiring performance in something that's bigger than sports, I actually chose Brett Favre's Monday Night Football game the day after he lost his dad. This was back in December 22nd, 2003. I remember I was just into college. Watching this kind of thing, because everybody's been through some kind of rough patch, some point in time where they've lost somebody that they love. you probably sit around heartbroken and beat up when you lost your hero. And for Brett Favre, his dad was his hero. He coached him as a kid all the way growing up and through high school. And to lose your idol like that, I mean, it was devastating. But to put in his words, he was like, my dad would want me to play. And this guy showed up. He completed his first 9 passes, threw for 4 touchdowns, 311 yards. And that was just in the first half of football. I mean, he was running around, chucking up footballs, and they were just ending up in his wide receiver's hands. And he was playing out of his mind. And, I would even say, divine intervention has to play a huge role in that game. It was career defining for him. I mean, Brett Favre is probably one of the best quarterbacks of all time, top 10, top 15, depending on where you have him. But that game, I mean, he's played in the Super Bowl. He's won a Super Bowl. But that game right there, I think that defined his entire career. I mean, he was always known as the tough guy, played in so many consecutive games. I believe he has the record, right? Consecutive games, broken bones, broken thumbs, concussion. The guy still played. He pushed through everything. And to have his dad die, his hero, his idol, and still show up the next day and not only just play, but dominate and have this performance of a lifetime. I mean, it's on the NFL's top 100 greatest games of all time. And it wasn't even the game itself. I mean, it was bigger than football. It was bigger tthan sports. It was about, a guy that everybody thought, man, this guy's a damn superstar, right? And then you see like this one side of him, this humble side of him. You look at his face before the game and you're like, how the hell is he out there? How the hell is this guy out here? The performance he put on and the show he put on for his wide receivers and his team and doing something for his dad, I thought was just amazing. I just don't think that any other performance could top that due to the situation that was around, due to him losing his dad.
You talk about career defining and what people are known for. By the way, a career defining monologue from you, Bob, with the improved audio. So we're happy to hear that.
Yeah, thank you.
Brett Favre, anybody who could dismiss this performance, I mean, it can happen, right? It was, I mean, with me, I missed 2 days of work after Big Pussy got whacked by Tony Soprano in The Sopranos. So you have Brett Favre taking hits from 275-pound lineman the very next day that his father passed away. The 399 yards, 4 TDs. It was the one thing I have that I could argue against this is it didn't have as many implications as I think some of the other notable examples that we talked about earlier. They were playing against a patchwork Raiders defense, Raiders team who was 4-12 that year. And I believe it was the last game of the season, last regular game of the season. Those are the only things that have me thinking, well, of course he can't pick the schedule or he can't pick the team who he's playing against after this terrible thing happened to me, but he was against a terrible Raiders team. It takes nothing away from the performance, but imagine if had this happened in, the playoffs or a game where he was playing against one of the top ranked defenses. I mean, that's the only thing that would have topped it. And I say that with all respect. What about you, Joseph?
The same, man. I mean, it's well known that, to our listeners that we give each other our answers beforehand. And to help us research and everything. Again, to agree with you and Bob, it is a great moment. I can't imagine what I would do in that situation. I can't imagine how I would feel. My heart says that I would want to do the same thing to try to find an escape, but I really don't know. Again, the stats are incredible: 22 for 30. 399 yards, 4 touchdowns in one half. To the counterpart, the Raiders, as you mentioned, Randy, not the best team at the time. They actually went through 3 different quarterbacks that game. If Donald Driver was quoted as saying that, telling the receivers, hey, whatever he does, we're catching. And so I guess if I wanted to be an asshole and say, to argue against it, could I say that was it all him, or did the receivers show up? It was 12 different receivers. He only missed 8 passes. 12 different receivers caught balls from Brett Favre that night. The 8 that he missed, those guys can go to hell, because that was because this should have been a straight 30 for 30 performance. Great 30 for 30. Hopefully a documentary coming up soon. But yeah, you wonder, is this a movie? Are we watching a movie? Is this really happening? What's going on in front of us? Should it be made into a movie? Possibly. I mean, you got to, look at Favre as a whole and ask yourself, is his whole career worth that? But this one game in particular. I remember when I watched it and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. So yeah, it really is hard to argue about this one other than, and if I want to be an asshole, I'll just say that maybe the receivers were just on their game.
I have another point, but Bob, go ahead. I see that you're chomping at the bit.
I kind of figured that this would be the argument to go against, and they're like, well, they were playing Oakland. Oakland wasn't that good that year, and man. But if you do recall, I know all of you all remember the Tuck Rule game, which happened to be in 2002
against the Raiders
of the previous year against the Raiders. The Raiders should have been in the Super Bowl a year prior. So it's not like they were playing against scrubs. It's not like they were playing against the 90s Tampa Bay Buccaneers, right? They were playing against a team that was one game-changing call away from being in the Super Bowl in 2002. And remember, this was in December 2003 when Brett Favre had this amazing performance. So it wasn't necessarily against scrubs. And Joseph, to your point, those receivers, man, I mean, I could see you look at somebody who's a leader, who's your brother, and man, you see them hurting and you want to do everything possible to make their performance a whole lot easier, to make their night easier, to make their pain or whatever easier. But I really do got to say that I really feel like there's a little bit of that divine intervention there, because some of those passes and some of those catches were just out of this world.
And and to your point, Bob, that does say a lot about Brett Favre's leadership and about what his teammates thought about him and about what they wanted to do for him. I know you did mention the Raiders, and I'll let you respond to this before we move on to Joseph's selection. But yes, they were a Tuck Rule away from the Super Bowl, but this was a Raiders team that was decimated with injuries. They were patchwork at this point. It was late in the season. The coaching was atrocious. I don't want to argue what Green Bay did. Obviously, they were inspired. They were there for a fallen teammate. They were there for a teammate that was hurting. But they were against the Raiders team who was just, hobbling, getting out of the season. So, it wasn't exactly the same Raiders team. I mean, a lot of people did come back, but a lot of people were out for that game.
I could see that. And I get that. I mean, a lot of times though, you see the record 4-12 and you're like, a lot of times the record doesn't necessarily reflect the actual team. And I know there are some injuries, but a lot of the NFL teams have a ton of injuries, especially mid-season, late season. That team as a whole, the Raiders, I mean, you can't pinpoint superstars on that team, even when they lost that Tuck Rule game to go into the Super Bowl. I mean, their quarterback was Rich Gannon, who's not bad, but he's not the greatest at all by any means. So, they had a good, solid team. I mean, they had a lot of players that contributed and played football. And, yes, I think the impact would have been amazing if it was in the playoffs, if it was to get into the Super Bowl, to get into the playoffs. If it was just one of those major games, I mean, the implications would be, nobody would have an argument against it. But I still feel like that performance under those circumstances made it just otherworldly.
Now we're going on to Joseph. I'm afraid to introduce this one because I know what we're going to talk about. We went from a guy that lost his dad to a guy who's probably a father to many people. But Joseph, tell us about your selection.
Well, okay, yeah. So on a lighter note, I went with Wilt Chamberlain's 100-point performance. This happened March 2nd, 1962 against the New York Knicks. As far as amazing sports performance, I mean, a one man scoring 100 points in an NBA game is on another level. He had, if you want to look at the list of career most points in a game, Wilt Chamberlain holds at least 7 of the top 10 performances. I believe he holds the third with 78, the fourth with 73. He's actually tied for fourth with 2 performances and one against David Thomas, all scoring 73 points. He's seventh on that list. And Jordan, who we all know is the best ever. No offense to the late great Kobe, but Jordan just is the best. Jordan's on that list at number 12 with 69. So 100 points in one game. Not every team scores 100 points in a game. It's let alone, first off, the game itself was great. It was a win with 169 to 147. Both teams put up 100 points, but 100 of those points were Wilt Chamberlain, and the 69 were for the rest of the team. While the other team, the Knicks, scored 147 total. What's
crazy is that you mentioned, 69 and Wilt Chamberlain in the
I know. Okay, so I know this is this was in in 1962. So the league itself wasn't as I can't say it was as competitive. This was the 60s. There's no greater era in basketball other than the 90s, the Jordan era, the Bird era, not the friend BA that we have right now, because this is horrible. You look at the 90s, that was probably the best time for the NBA. That everybody was tough. And other than Kobe scoring 81 in 2006, which was before what I just called the friend BA situation, Kobe is second on that list, and he's one of the greatest. I think he's second to Jordan, excuse me. But Chamberlain scoring 100 points against a single team. I mean, Lord knows how many other points he scored later that night in the hotel room after the game, possibly the day after, or maybe he just kept scoring in general. But 100 points in one game. I mean, come on. Not every team scores 100 points in a game, and for one man to do it, amazing.
I think, I don't know if it was Chris Rock that said the joke that Wilt Chamberlain is the only NBA player that has a shot clock on top of his bedroom, just because of all the action he's gotten. But anyway, I knew we couldn't talk about Wilt Chamberlain without talking about his off the court antics. But I do have a few things to talk about this performance. I can't judge him on any other performances. But
I'm not here to talk about that. I'm not talking about that either. I mean, we all know he probably scored.
I mean, he's got a ton of rebounds, but this game, it was not televised, and there was no video footage of the game since it had,
unfortunately.
Yeah. The only thing you have is him holding that index card that says, 100 points. There are no audio recordings of the fourth quarter, and the NBA itself. I mean, it's a beast now. Everybody, this, I would say it rivals football as America's sport at this point. But at the time, the NBA was not recognized as being a major sports league. Actually, college basketball was bigger than the NBA when you had UCLA and all these other colleges, Kentucky, etc. I was more impressed by a few other things that Wilt Chamberlain did.
2000?
I think it was 10,000, but he averaged 50 points. He averaged 50.4 points per game. He had 25 rebounds in that game. And Wilt Chamberlain, a noted poor free throw shooter, I think he hit 28 out of 32 in that game. But here's the thing. Kobe's, I think he had 84 points. Was it 84 points against
81.
Toronto? 81 points against Toronto. Toronto wasn't a very good team, but we had some capable defenders at the time. I think Jalen Rose was the one that took the brunt of that. But Wilt Chamberlain in this game, I'm looking at the guys who defended him. Daryl Imhoff, Cleveland Buckner, Dave Budd. They all look like, and I looked these guys up on Wikipedia, on Google. They look like the Beach Boys. I mean, these guys were like plumbers compared to some of the NBA, and that's not to take away from Wilt Chamberlain. You don't choose your opponents, right?
Exactly.
I made that point.
I said that, and I kind of said that too. I mean, I know it was the 60s, and it was different back then, but
But I mean, he was Wilt Chamberlain was tall. I mean, he was a guy when he was on the low post, nobody penetrated like Wilt Chamberlain. So he was just, I mean, he was unstoppable. I mean, he couldn't be contained.
Clearly.
He
couldn't be contained. I mean, he was somebody that was in the NBA before its time. I mean, great wingspan, excellent defender, excellent rebounder, tremendous scorer. My biggest takeaway from this is that, yes, 100 points is 100 points, take it or leave it. But the people that were defending him, I mean, this guy, Daryl Imhoff, was on 6 teams in 12 years. He only averaged 10 points twice in his career. Cleveland Buckner was a 6'9" journeyman as well. I just don't think that, the competition. I know that's the same argument we made with Bob's first example with the Brett Favre. But Bob, what do you think about this performance? What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, you cannot take away 100 points. 100 points is just it's unfathomable. It's just an amazing feat. Mm-hmm. And you got to remember too that yes, Kobe Bryant had 81 points, but when Wilt Chamberlain scored 100, there was no 3-point line. So these were two. I mean, he made it to 100, making 2 points at a time. Mm-hmm. One thing that you can take away from it, and I've said this about Shaq for a long time, Shaq is great, yes, but when you're 7'1", 320 pounds going against, 6'10", 180, 200 pound posts, you're going to dominate, man. And like Randy was saying, one of the first off, the starting center for that team was actually out with an injury. So they had a backup actually going against Wilt. Chamberlain in the game. And soon, I think it was by the second quarter, the backup was in foul trouble. So they had to put in Buckner, who actually, Randy, he was 6'9". You got that. He was 6'9". Again, mentioning 6'9", Wilt Chamberlain. But he was actually a rookie that year. So Wilt Chamberlain had his will against a 6'9" rookie that entire game. And towards the end of the game as well, the coach, which is pretty amazing, he was telling his players to foul the Knicks. So that way they'd get the ball back and Wilt would have the chance to get 100. So he was kind of playing that little foul just to save time. So that way Wilt can go for his number, and exactly, we've made a lot of jokes at the expense of Wilt Chamberlain and his sexual prowess, of course. But, the real joke here is the Knicks. I mean, God, they've been this bad for a very, very long time. And they took the brunt of 100 points from Wilt Chamberlain. But Joseph, to your point too, I know you mentioned the final score. The final score was 169 to 147. Who the hell was playing defense though?
Exactly. I thought about that myself.
I mean, damn, it's almost embarrassing, the kind of defensive performance by both teams in that game. When you score 169 to 147, geez.
I got to believe that there was some video footage of that, but after the lack of defense, the video was, everybody just, let's stop recording this. And then Wilt started going off and then they lost that opportunity.
Yeah. So nothing taken against Wilt Chamberlain. He's one of the greats, one of the best ever. But when you tower over everybody and when you're playing a 6'9" rookie, and the coach on your team is doing everything he can to get the ball in your hands just so you could break the record, it kind of takes the steam out of the win a little bit. And it was against the Knicks. I'm just going to throw that in again.
And Wilt Chamberlain's just a tremendous athlete before his time. There was nobody that could stop him. I mean, Wilt took it to the hole whenever he wanted, and it's just impossible to defend him. It was just impossible to defend him. But Joseph, what is your defense to this? I mean, the Knicks didn't play defense, but could you play a little defense here to talk a little bit about why? Do you believe that? I'll put it to you this way. I personally find Kobe's 81 points more impressive than this, but what would be your defense in that Wilt Chamberlain's all-time record still ranks amongst the best, or is the best, I should say?
The fact that it hasn't been beaten, and the fact that, unfortunately, not only that night he played the Knicks and it was 100 points, but again, as I mentioned, if you look at the list of all-time scoring performances in a game, Wilt holds the third spot at 78. I'm sorry, I don't know who. I didn't write down who he was playing, but he's done this. He's scored more than 70 points at least 4 or 5 times. I don't have those teams right now, and that's my fault. I apologize. But yes, this one game was against the Knicks, but he did this to other teams as well, scoring 70 or more. So it's a record that hasn't been beaten. I know the league is a lot different now. It would be more impressive if it happened in the 90s. I will openly admit that if Jordan did this, because Jordan, like I said, he's 12th with only 69 points. Go ahead, Bob.
To argue for your pick, I know we're supposed to argue against it. And I think we've given plenty of great arguments against it. In Kobe Bryant did score 81 points, but Kobe Bryant, how many assists did he have that game?
He took a lot of shots.
And he took a lot of shots, a lot of 3-point shots as well too. It's kind of surprising to me that nobody in the NBA now has broken that record, considering how soft it is now. I mean, every little ticky-tack foul, every little hey scream gets you to the free throw line. I'm surprised that nobody's hit that 70, 80, 90 mark to even get close to Wilt Chamberlain. So in itself, it's an amazing stat, and one that I don't think can ever be beaten, even though we have this soft ticky-tack offensive league, and it's happening to every league in the NFL. It's all about offense. It's all about points, because, points. I know a few years ago, they were even talking about making the hockey goal wider, so that way we can have more points, right, and make it more exciting. So it's become an offensive of league in NBA, in NFL, and all across all sports. So to see players I'm not going to say the word struggle, because it's not a struggle, but get nowhere near 100 points or 80 points like Kobe Bryant, it says a lot about that record, and really do feel like Wilt Chamberlain did an amazing job. It really is a great perforance.
And I'm sorry, real quick. Another thing for me too is I can't make 3 shots in a row, and this guy, at least, if you want to do the math, that's great. On any kind of day, if I was going to play any kind of basketball game, which I'm not a basketball player, but if I attempted to, I probably wouldn't have more than 10 points. And this guy scored 100.
What's crazy is Wilt Chamberlain is probably one of the greatest basketball players of all time. And performing this feat, having one of the greatest performance ever, really says a lot about him as a person, as a player, that he was great. But you know what? Not all great players have these great performances. And sometimes you don't need to be a great player to have this amazing over-the-top performance that could be considered one of the greatest of all time. And that what leads us right to Randy's case. Randy, what did you choose for your...
Yes, well, we're sticking with the NBA. And I thought a lot about this. And what I went with, and both of you chose two of the best in the league. I mean, Brett Favre and Wilt Chamberlain's performances in their respective sports are unassailable. I decided to go a different route. I decided to select I went with Jeremy Lin. Jeremy Lin, as you know, is a NBA player. He's currently in the G League with the Warriors affiliate. But there was a time, and to me, when you think about best single game performances, it's got to read like a storybook. It's got to read. I love Cinderella stories. I love when a player comes out of nowhere and does something he or she was not expected to do. And in the 2011-12 season, you guys remember Linsanity. I remember there was 2 weeks in the NBA where this guy was the best player. He was the top news story. He was the best player in the league for 12 games. He was averaging, I should say, one of the best players. He was averaging 22.5 points and 8.7 assists. And then completely, I don't want to say he fell off the earth. He had a couple of good seasons afterwards with Charlotte and Brooklyn. He battled some injuries. He's a NBA champion with Toronto. He didn't get much playing time while he was there. But the things that Jeremy Lin overcame, he was somebody who was not expected to be an NBA player. And this is to his own words. He is somebody that, as we know, he's Asian American. And he was told his whole career, that he was not going to be good enough to make it to the next level or make it to the level after that. A lot of it were cruel stereotypes that a lot of people inflicted on him, which was unfortunate, of course. He went to Harvard. You don't see many Ivy League players in the NBA. The last one I remember was Chris Studley, who played for the Nets, who is as bad as a free throw shooter as Wilt Chamberlain was. But Will, and you hear about Jeremy, and I selected this before the news, the sound clip came out, or the news story came out about Jeremy Lin raising awareness on the violent attacks against Asian Americans in this country. But he was the total spotlight, and even the way he was built. I mean, he was a skinny 6'3", maybe 170 pounds, but he was battling. When you saw these 2 weeks where Jeremy Lin was scoring, tremendous, you saw these tremendous game-winning baskets. And the one game I wanted to point to was the 38 points and 7 assists against the Lakers for several reasons. He played in New York, which is the biggest media market, and he was playing against LA. The Lakers are the biggest franchise. LA is the second biggest media market. He was playing against Kobe. He outscored Kobe 38 points to 34 points. He was taking players to the hole. He was doing some tremendous footwork. The crowd was loving it. And Linsanity was something that, it just took over the world. He's not the best NBA player. We know that afterwards he signed a contract with the Rockets. They thought he was going to be their point guard of the future. Didn't pan out. He played for the Lakers. Didn't pan out. Hornets, Brooklyn, the Hawks. He's been bounced around the league. But for 2 weeks, Jeremy Lin just took the NBA world by storm. And I know a lot of it's like, well, he's not the typical player that we're accustomed to. This was, before, somebody like Steph Curry really took over with, same sort of build. But what are your thoughts about Linsanity, in particular this game, Bob?
Well, you can't take a lot away from Jeremy Lin. If feeding into the stereotypes, he faced a lot. He wasn't the prototypical NBA star, right? And you got to love that underdog story, that story of the kid that nobody expects anything of, and he shows up in the big game, or he creates a name for himself by doing it. He made the Knicks relevant for how many weeks?
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Yeah.
Indeed. That's 2 more weeks than they've been since Wilt Chamberlain dropped 100 points on them.
And then Carmelo Anthony came in and just sideswiped him. I think
again, Carmelo Anthony is another guy who's a fantastic player. Don't get me wrong, but he's an offensive player. He's in that offensive NBA player. That's all offense. But speaking to Jeremy Lin's player and his play in that game, specifically scoring 38 points and taking it to Kobe, I feel like he played a great game, but 38 points. I mean, I'm sure there's hundreds of NBA stars that have scored 38 points in a game. So it kind of takes some of the piss out of it, I would say. If you look back at it and you talked about it, he went from team to team. Yes, he has had a lot of injuries. Yes, he never quite fit in certain areas, but one could possibly look at it as a fluke game, a 38-point fluke game. I wouldn't necessarily say it's all a fluke. I mean, there's definitely some skill there, but it doesn't have quite the impact, I think, that a Wilt Chamberlain 100 points changes the NBA record forever, or a Brett Favre, the emotional game. That's just one of the greatest performances. Now, Jeremy Lin's 38 points, doing it on a grand stage against Kobe Bryant and beating Kobe Bryant, says a lot about the man, says a lot about his character, says a lot about his talent. But I just feel like it was maybe more remarkable because of who he was, how he was different, and because, man, this guy comes in, he's not the prototypical size, not the prototypical NBA looking player. He just dropped 38 points on the LA Lakers with Kobe Bryant. So that's just my argument.
Joseph, before you respond, and good points, Bob. The one thing I will say, and I maybe I didn't, exemplify it when I first, he was carrying the weight of so many Asian Americans who saw somebody who was like, he's part of our community. He's somebody that, we have had some tremendous, Chinese basketball players, Yao Ming, but this was an Asian American who just took the world by storm and represented a fan base that thought, yes, that is somebody who's one of us. He's incredible, and he's doing it at the biggest, largest scale.
I agree.
I agree. It was a great performance. My only knock against it, Kobe at the time, he was quoted as saying he didn't know anything about who Jeremy Lin was before the game. I'm sure he did after the game. I mean, the guy scored more points than you. Granted, Kobe wasn't defending Jeremy Lin. I don't think so, because Kobe didn't play defense. I'm not trying to knock on him. That's just the truth. So whoever was defending Jeremy Lin clearly did a horrible job. This one game was one game in about a 2 week, almost a month of a great, the Linsanity thing was great. And I think Linsanity as a whole is what is a better story, I guess. It was almost a month, a great 2 weeks. It started probably I believe it was on the 4th of February, scored 25 points. On the 6th, he scored 28. These 3 games before the 38-point game, he averaged at least 25 points. He had the 38-point game. We all saw that. And then the next, for the next week or so, he was averaging at least 20 points a game. So it was a great time. It was a great moment for him, for his, for the people that he represented. But this one game was one moment in a great week. And that's why I can't really say a great one game sports performance.
I know Kobe Bryant switched off of him a few times. By the way, Kobe Bryant, 12 all defensive teams, 5-time all defensive first team. So he was a tremendous defender. He didn't guard him. He didn't guard him on all the plays, but he did guard him on a few switches. And I know that Jeremy Lin did take it to him a few times.
I think those things were more name recognition. I mean, clearly he was a star, so why not give him some more awards? And I'm not talking shit about Kobe Bryant. He loved to score. Shaq said it. Give me the ball. There's a me in team.
Can I just point out one thing? We've said taking it to the hole way too many times in this.
We did. It was
after mentioning Wilt Chamberlain, but taking it to the hole, and he really took it. I mean, we may want to cut out a few of those in at the end
of what's crazy is your choice, Randy. This game is actually on the 10th. It was a 9-year anniversary, so it's pretty surreal. And to hear, yes, like you said, he was in the news. Jeremy Lin, the situation currently, our current climate that we're living in, it's so surreal. I mean, I looked that up and I saw that it was February 10th, 2012 that this game happened. So little over, just slightly over 9 years ago today, and he's in the news again. It's surreal.
Excellent. Guys, it looks like we're wrapping it up right now. I just want to thank you guys for your selections. I want to give a shout out to our listeners in Ohio. LeBron should have never left you twice. Thank you guys. Please stay with us. We love you.
We will not leave you.
We will not leave you.
Our friends from France.
France, for sure.
Boy. Thank you all.
France, Japan. Who else do we got? We got New York, Colorado's with us. And we're from Texas. We're Texas guys. And we see some states beating Texas. So Texas, we need you guys. Please listen to us.
Yeah, we would love our home state to get some viewers. Listeners.
Absolutely. So listeners, we'd like to hear from you. What sports performances did we not mention? Who are your favorite performances? You could let us know. You may reach us at Formidable Opponents, at gmail.com. And of course, follow us on Twitter at FOpponents. Next week, join us as we talk about best breakup song. We will be arguing about the best breakup song. We've been talking about this topic for a couple of weeks now. We're really excited about this one. So please join us next week. Best breakup song. We will be arguing that.
Bring your tissues with you because we're gonna go deep into this one. We said deep again.
Go deep again, God Almighty. So nothing compares to you, Wilt. Nothing will ever compare.
So for Bob Bettis, Joseph Jackson, and 10,000 of Wilt Chamberlain's closest friends, I'm Randall Garza, and we will talk to you next week here at Formidable Opponents. Have a great week, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Good night, boys.